Wyatt followed the princess through the lavish hallways in complete silence until the group reached her quarters. 2 Royal Marines remained outside, guarding the entrance, while the other 2 entered alongside them. They moved to a corner of the room, each standing still as a statue. Before he could ask Clara what was wrong, the princess turned to face him with a cold, serious expression and piercing purple eyes that reflected a void emptier than space. Then, as a shudder traveled down his spine, she stepped forward with a finger pointing at him. Just as she opened her mouth, Cynthia made her voice known first. "That's enough, Clara," Cynthia said, removing her helmet to reveal an unamused expression plastered on her face. Wyatt recognized the unapproving stare of the blue-haired woman. He'd only seen her doing it whenever the princess was planning to enjoy her eccentric version of fun to some capacity. This was proven to be the case when Clara's expression dropped and she pouted for a brief second before crossing her arms. Releasing a sigh, the princess spoke up, her eyes and tone returning to her usual friendly attitude. "You are no fun, Cynthia. And I told you I wasn't going to let you torment Wyatt for your sick amusement, Clara," Cynthia replied deadpan. "Setting that harlot upon him was enough and all I would tolerate." Clara gasped, hurt. "Torment! Cut your lying tongue. I would not invite such unpleasant thoughts to even enter my mind just for my amusement." She defended herself, and Cynthia, completely unfazed and unconvinced by her words, merely raised an eyebrow in response. "I was only going to poke long enough until he squirmed a little. Nothing wrong with that." Cynthia sighed tiredly and pinched the bridge of her nose. "Clara." "Don't you Clara me, Cynthia. I'm your princess. Respect me," Clara countered with a light blush spread across her cheeks. "You're also my friend, and in private, that takes precedence. Will you stop this charade already, or must I do so myself?" Cynthia asked with a tiny smirk on her lips. The battle was won. "You can be so boorish, you know." Clara let out a defeated sigh and then turned to a very puzzled Wyatt. "Come, sit. I'll explain everything now that a certain blue-haired demon has ruined my fun. Don't worry, I was only planning to poke a few times," she said, turning to the chairs and the table a few meters to their right. Taking a seat, she waited until Wyatt sat across the table. "You must be wondering what we're talking about." "Yes," Wyatt answered, his voice mirroring his confused expression. "Torment? Poke at me? Watch me squirm? Did I do something wrong? Is this some sort of punishment for me shooting at the statue?" "That was resolved when it happened. Fret not," Clara replied, pausing for a moment to glance at Cynthia, who, in turn, slightly tilted her head. "This is another matter entirely. Tell me, what do you think I sent you to escort Lady Cinter when we met in the gardens?" Feeling relieved, his uneasiness dwindled as his mind got to work on the possibilities. After a few seconds of hard thinking, only one option seemed feasible to him. "Was it a gesture of friendliness?" Clara nodded softly. "In a sense, yes. As opposing forces, conflict would be inevitable were it not for the laws of neutrality that force us to stay our hands. Do you recall what I told you as we arrived?" Wyatt nodded. "This also extends to diplomatic and casual interaction. As her superior in rank and standing, sending a member of my party to join hers briefly is a sign of respect, a simple act that can convey many messages." She paused for a moment, her expression shifting to one of seriousness, barely containing her need to smile. "Of course, this has many meanings. Should have I sent Cynthia, she wouldn't have uttered a single word to her, and she would have thought that I considered a dangerous threat. A Royal Marine would show my contempt, and, in a similar venue, she would have believed herself to be a threat to my plans, and also paint me as insecure." The blonde princess's lips widened into a playful smirk. "But what sort of message would be read by others if a recently elevated noble, a knight banneret with a puzzling connection to House Astor, is sent instead? A knight that, due to his actions, besmirched the honor of his charge?" An amused and almost condescending giggle escaped her throat a moment later. "A woman such a facility Centaur would see my gesture as a carefully veiled insult. To send such an inexperienced man as a show of good grace? She'd think I see her as beneath me, nothing more than a pebble I can kick as I walk. But, at the same time, she'd see an opportunity to gain any information about this mysterious man that came out of nowhere." Wyatt nodded, understanding her words but failing to comprehend how such a simple venture could be perceived differently depending on just one factor or another. But the more she explained her line of thinking, the more he saw the sense in them. He wasn't skilled in her field, but he knew his own perfectly. Imagining correlations between being in battle and what she was describing made it easier for him to process. In the roughest way possible, it was similar to luring enemy fighters out. Every movement mattered and counted toward victory or death. His eyes widened and Clara smiled widely as realization struck him. "You tricked her?" he asked, and Clara nodded. "You sent me so she would feel insulted and take the moment to talk to me. But what would she gain from knowing anything about me?" She nodded again. "She pressured me several times, but she never seemed interested in me. Not directly, at least. She spent half the time praising me for my ennoblement and the other half lamenting that I'm at your service. She was charming and insulting in equal measure. It felt as if she was trying to attack me from different vectors." Slowly, his eyes shifted from one side to the other as he recalled his encounter with the black-haired woman. In the end, she promised that House Ferentis would side with House Draymore, but that didn't happen. She said victory would not smile upon us, and it didn't. Unless... His mouth opened in abject horror. "I told her that my goal was to make a deal with House Ferentis regarding their agricultural production?" Clara asked, glancing at Cynthia, who was shaking her head slowly. Closing her eyes for a moment, she accepted the silent rebuke of her friend. "Before you grow too agitated, my dear Wyatt, know that I am neither angry nor hold you in contempt for it. Oh no, on the contrary, I counted on it." Wyatt, upon hearing her words, felt the embarrassment, guilt, and sense of failure growing in his belly stop and slowly dissipate. She expected me to reveal her goal? Why? Why didn't she just tell me to share the information with her at some point? Did she avoid ordering me so my words were to be genuine? But why? It doesn't make any sense, unless the food wasn't her goal at all. Then that means... His thoughts came crashing down with a single, undeniable truth. "You lied to me," he said. Not a question, but an affirmation. "Why?" "It was a gamble on my part," Clara replied. "To be clear, I objected to it from the start, but I couldn't deny the potential benefits at play. Clara's mind can be a web of deceit and contradicting ideas that not even I dare to even begin to comprehend," Cynthia clarified, coming to stand next to her blonde friend. "I hate it when these sorts of gambles pay off, but I would hate them more if they didn't, my unhinged princess." "They are gambles for a reason," Clara rebuked, as her cheeks were once more tinged with a small blush. Clearing her throat, she continued, "Please do understand one thing, Wyatt. I lied to you out of necessity, not because I do not trust you. You are merely unfamiliar with the sort of dealings I must take into consideration constantly, now so more than ever." Wyatt nodded as he processed her confession. "You told me that when in private I could be honest. So I will be, Clara." He took a deep breath, worrying that he may speak out of line. "You're a princess. I can't judge you for lying to me no matter your reasons. Knowing that you did so to trick an enemy, I can only ask if I was a useful tool." "A splendid tool in that regard, Wyatt. You are my friend, confidant, and more. Much like Cynthia is my friend, she too is my tool, sword, shield, and executioner if need be," Clara said, leaning back against her chair and crossing her arms under her chest. "I do not enjoy doing what must be done, but I will do so without hesitation. Truth be told, I was going to tell you about my deception had things gone differently prior to your brave actions against the statue," she said with a hint of humor in her voice. "Can you guess what made me carry on with my gamble before that incident?" Wyatt thought for a second or two as the answer manifested itself in his mind. "The gunship escorts and Lord Genoc's welcome?" Clara nodded. "Precisely. House Ferentis was under no obligation to send any sort of escort to greet my arrival, and yet they sent a formal escort anyway. And the nobles present? The heads of the most prominent houses in Balakura, those directly under the protection and authority of House Ferentis. Their presence was, again, not mandatory, but they came, either by force or of their own volition, regardless. It demonstrated not only a welcoming gesture, but also the pressure and need for negotiations to be had as soon as possible." "Did you plan this from the start?" he asked tentatively. surprised yet again by the supreme foresight and intelligence that the beautiful and deadly princess possessed. Lying to me was part of your gamble? I don't mind that you lied to me, Clara. Like I said, I have no place to say anything against you nor resent you for it. Lying isn't a problem to me, he said, sounding as sincere as he could. It was true. He truly wasn't mad that she'd lied and used him for her political benefits. He understood her position needed sacrifices to be made. But yet, no matter how much he tried to squash it, a small part of him felt hurt. Not betrayed, just hurt. Clara paused for a moment, her expression reflecting a hint of guilt that was gone the second after. She then raised her right hand, presenting her palm to her pilot. If there is an ability that could allow someone to see the future or predict events in advance to such a minute detail, I would be mortified and frightened beyond belief of anyone possessing such power. No, Wyatt, I didn't plan this from the start. When playing these twisted games of casual backstabbing, blatant treachery, fake smiles, and rapacious opportunism, I have to account for every possibility. She paused, tilting her hand to the left. What resources are at my disposal? Who am I going to contend with? Who are my allies? What is it that the other side desires to obtain? What circumstances are at play? She tilted her hand to the right next, slowly moving her fingers as she did so. How can I take advantage of an unforeseen situation? How can I exploit the weaknesses of my rival? How do I present myself as powerful, vulnerable, gentile, ruthless, caring? Must I plant the seeds of discord and doubt? Should I present lies as truth, truths as lies, or choose honesty instead? The blonde woman closed her hand, then turned it to the side, opening it until her fingers aligned in a vertical line. All of that and more just so I can glimpse at possible outcomes and ultimately try to direct events and action into the best I can forge. I have to use every tool, trick, play, and countermove at my disposal to make this a reality. How I wish I could solve every problem with a single command. So many lives lost needlessly, so much corruption, idiocy, malicious incompetence, and the accursed thirst for power that had brought us to this point. Countless billions of lives are at risk. How many will be spared? If my actions can save but a single more life, then I shall sleep knowing I did everything in my power to make the best decision. That is a level of pressure I wouldn't wish upon anyone, Wyatt thought, and glanced at his blue-haired friend, seeing the pain and understanding in her eyes. How many times had Cynthia seen her friend struggling or second-guessing herself? Just how many lives were upon her shoulders to carry and worry about? Clara wasn't a monster, but she could become one if something forced her to turn into one. What made him respect and now care for her was how she genuinely cared for others and how she detested the very concept of abusing her power. She wasn't like other blue bloods. Wyatt felt pity, empathy, and the urge to reach out and grab her hand, to show her that he stood by her side, always, regardless of anything. He would protect her and, if need be, carry out the mission that the prince himself entrusted him with. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Wyatt could feel those amethyst-colored eyes pierce into his soul. Her hand slightly moved forward again, but stopped before advancing a single inch. Forgive me, Wyatt. When I'm passionate about something, I rant and ramble mindlessly, Clara apologized. Wyatt crossed his arms and replied, Aren't friends meant to hear the woes of their friends? Both women blinked in surprise for a moment, then a smile returned to their faces. So, you can't see the future, which means you have to adjust your plans at every turn? Precisely. Your reaction to the statue is something I never considered could happen. I simply seized the moment to let gossip and rumor mill go their course so it worked in your favor whilst, simultaneously, I gave Lady HFY an accolade in the form of taming my fury. A mirthful giggle ran past her lips. But most importantly, it ensured that the Draymore envoys would take notice of you and force our paths to cross. I initially thought about being the one approaching the envoys, in this case Lady Felicity, but that changed to them approaching me instead, replied the princess. And that ended up with me telling them about the food. All of that because of a gamble in your plans? Wyatt asked, raising an eyebrow. It worked, did it not? Clara answered. Regardless of that, the negotiations wouldn't have changed much, but by giving them an objective to follow, it made things so much easier for me. I don't understand why you let them win, though, Wyatt said, resting his hands on the table. They took the food from House Ferentis for themselves. Their supply lines will be secured inside their territory, and they could strike at the prince's forces easier. Cynthia let out a surprised laugh. You understand logistics? Compost hauler, he said, pointing at himself. Also a commoner. I don't know how the big trade networks work, but my brother Weskal has to go on hunting expeditions that can last for weeks. Getting good supplies is vital. That goes the same for wood on the wood mill. A healthy line of supplies and huge stockpiles are always a good thing, Wyatt said, then stopped, frowned, and a thought crossed his mind. Clara, why did you come to Ferentis territory in the first place? This succession war has been active for, what, a few months at most? Stockpiles on stations and planets should be high. Positioning, Wyatt, she said and raised a finger. House Ferentis is bordered by Houses Renshine, Caiston, and Finnegan. House Rheinshine is also neutral, but their fealty falls more in line with House Ionati. House Ferentis, however, has a long and controversial history of flimsy vows of fidelity to any royal house, and instead maintaining a stance of neutrality in almost every conflict. Why, House Ferentis was one of the few houses that came virtually unscathed during the last civil war. Commendable, she praised sincerely. Gaining the support of their house, or at least locking their main line of production from falling onto others, is a sound strategy. One that the traitors now possess, he said in an almost mournful tone. What have they truly gained? Clara asked. Overpriced foodstuffs and related products? Forcing our travel time to be longer due to a lack of easy resupply on warships without proper escort and supply ships. The enforcement of a neutrality pact that will ensure no conflict occurs within their territory? These things are worthless to me. Felicity Centaur can pat herself on the back for her apparent victory all she wants. By the time she realizes her mistake, it will be too late to change it. She hummed deeply and tapped on her chin a few times. I do wonder what sort of shadow deals they made with House Ferentis, but I will not pry in such dealings. Wyatt was stunned for a moment, then he smiled a toothy grin. Oh, he could definitely understand sacrificing worthless things of no value to him for something of true significance. He lost his grin, however, when he heard Clara mention shadow deals. Shadow deals? He asked, curious. Agreements and whatnot made under the table without the other party's knowledge, Cynthia replied nonchalantly. Most of the time, a deal made at the negotiating table is just a show of formalities, as the true agreements have been made days in advance. Then what was the point of the negotiations? Wyatt asked, shocked. Most of the time, Wyatt, not all the time, Cynthia answered. Geenock is desperate to settle a deal. I'm sure that wench refused him or agreed to something else. The negotiations at the table were genuine, but not what Geenock and his house wanted. Speaking of him, Clara spoke as she stood up, quickly shifting her expression to her fake smiling one. He is here. Do not speak, either of you. I shall do the talking. Remain as you are. Let them see your faces. Understood, Wyatt and Cynthia replied in unison. The pilot stood up and moved to flank Clara just in time for the door to open, revealing Geenock, Ishivi, Jolty, and the other nameless son he'd seen at the negotiating table. My Lord Geenock, Clara greeted with a bow of her head. I hope that you're satisfied with the deal struck between your house and my uncle? I am, Geenock replied dryly. Princess, may I present to you my third son, Istanel Ferentis? The vibrant-haired man bowed his head respectfully. Introduction could not be made earlier. It is of no matter, Clara replied. I shall be departing soon from your beautiful world, Lord Geenock. Tell me, is there anything you need of me? I would like the assistance of the prince in securing our borders and trade lanes. Sadly, as you made entirely clear, much like Lady Felicity, the fleets are unavailable to carry such duties. Our system defenses will have to carry the burden. However, there is another great pressing matter that, much to my misfortune, Lady Felicity has refused to bring aid unless I bend the knee. Truth be told, I nearly did. Clara frowned, her smile lost, replaced by an icy, emotionless expression that dropped the temperature in the room by several degrees. Explain. My princess, it was Ishivi who answered instead of her husband, We detected 3 distinct Drazen incursions over the past month across our territory, but they never launched an assault. They all entered the same system, and not a single ship has exited it for over 2 weeks. We want to destroy these Drazen raiders before they launch a concentrated assault, or worse, more of their kin arrive to reinforce them. The worst-case scenario would be the establishment of a rogue Drazen colony in that system, Yolti added, his voice trembling slightly. We beg of you, Your Majesty, aid us. Cleanse these monstrosities and the pirate-infested system before tragedy strikes. Pirate-infested system? Are you saying that this system is a fallen one? Asked the princess. 30 years ago, the Hastrung system suffered a massive uprising led by a rebel that successfully took not just the planet, Hago, but the entire system. House Ferentis has tried to retake the system several times, but failed each time. My father died 10 years ago when he tried to retake it, Geenock answered, fists shaking. Now it's infested with Drazen. I will not shed tears for the pirate and rebel scum, but we cannot allow the raiders to take hold of the system. Every neighboring system would suffer their raids for years to come otherwise. That is a dire predicament, Clara replied before walking around the table until she was right in front of the now nervous head of the house. You said Lady Centaur refused to aid you unless you bent the knee. Why didn't you? I do not wish to throw my house into needless conflict. We're farmers and builders, not warriors. House Ferentis and the millions of lives under our care would be at great peril if we choose a side recklessly, Geenock replied. Internally, Wyatt was fuming at the thought of so many Drazen gathered in one place, ready to conquer a system and massacre who knows how many innocents. His boiling anger was further elevated by Geenock's reasoning. He could read between the lines. Despite the danger of the Drazen, he still wanted to remain neutral, but at the same time receive help without offering anything. Geenock's face was slowly morphing into that of Serhan Gimor, and only the knowledge that the man was definitely not the coward, damnable parasite stopped him from even showcasing contempt across his stoic, emotionless expression. Glancing at the blue-haired woman, he found that whilst she remained stoic and unflinching, she was slicing and carving the cowardly, slimy noble with her glare alone. Since you wish to retain your neutrality and yet receive aid in turn, I should leave you now and never return, condemning you as cowards unworthy of your thrones, titles, riches, and positions. However, you are in luck. For my brother, the prince, requires something far more significant than your feeble loyalty, Clara remarked with poison. The ink and the parchment will bind you instead of righteousness. At my disposal, I have a mighty, powerful ship that will cleanse the Hastrung system from the Drazen invaders. Not only that, but if we are able to do so, the system and everything within it, salvage, outposts, and the habitable planet itself, shall be yours for the taking. Geenock fell to one knee, followed by his wife and sons. My princess, what is it that you require of my house? If you wish so, I shall tear the treatment signed with House Draymore. There is no need for it. I shan't insult my uncle in such a way, traitor or not. What I want is something far more precious. I want exclusive access to all anchorages and shipyards across your territory. The prince demands that your industry and shipbuilding prowess are put into his service, at value market. No discounts nor extra fees are to be at play. This, of course, means that you shall deny harbor to Draymore forces, but retain commercial lines with them freely. Jolty stood up, confused. My princess, House Ferentis doesn't produce warships bigger than the smallest frigates at most. Freighters, haulers, mining ships, boring ships, and other civilian-grade ships are what we produce. Did I say I want what you produce? Clara asked coldly. I said I want access to your anchorages and shipyard, your industry and prowess, not what you produce. Our forces shall bring their own resources, technology, and engineers. We simply require your installations and local industry. Nothing more. You plan to use our shipyards to build warships? Geenock asked, astonished as he, his other son, and his wife stood up. You won't be able to produce anything bigger than a light destroyer. We have no dedicated military shipyards. I asked not for your opinions. You have come begging for aid. I've given my offer. Will you accept? Clara smiled coldly. You ask for much, and yet I will not force you to bend the knee. Do you accept? Yes or no? Answer now, for my patience is thin. Geenock and his family exchanged looks, with Istanel eagerly nodding his head. Bereft of options, Geenock lowered his head in submission. I accept your most generous offer, my princess. However, my son Istanel shall go with you as my eyes to ensure that you carry out your word. As a precaution, you understand? Clara's expression shifted once more, returning to her fake smile, and the tension in the room eased. Of course, Lord Geenock. I would be disappointed if you were to accept without placing any sort of insurance on a delicate and important matter such as this one. I shall ensure his survival, and that he will witness the liberation of the Hastrung system. Which reminds me, Lord Geenock, there are several prisoners, pirates, aboard my ship. Please send a message to the officials at the station so they can be safely transferred into their custody. What you do with them is not of my concern. Of course, my princess, gladly, Geenock said, and his eyes flickered with light for a few seconds. It is done. They shall be gone from your ship by the time you are departed. Yolti? At his command, his son produced a small cylinder from within his vest, handing it over to his father. Shall we rectify the agreement, my princess? One moment, Clara said, turning to Ishvi. Lady Ishvi, I would consider it a personal favor if you were so kind as to give me the recipe for those delicious cream-filled pastries, the long pink ones. I'm afraid I've come to enjoy them greatly. Oh, the veshkom. Yes, of course, my princess. It is one of our finest pastries. It would honor us greatly to give you the recipe, she said. Splendid. Now where were we, Lord Geenock? Clara asked as she and the older man sat down to rectify the official treaty. With the tension gone, Wyatt felt his mouth water at the memory of the bread thing, a veshkom, apparently, and made a simple decision. I'm going to buy a baking book, and from now on, I'm going to download a map of every garden I ever come across. It took me an hour to find a garden tender just to find the way out. If you'd like early access to The Black Ship and other stories featured on our YouTube channel, join our Patreon site where the author receives a percentage of everyone who subscribes. Just signing up for free will get you early access to the reboot of The Last Humans as well as all the latest channel news. Now on with the story. Matcha, Grand Palace, Central Command Room. The prince quietly drummed on the table, his fingers giving a faint, fleshy beat that he couldn't hear over the organized chaos that surrounded him. Men and women were at their stations, typing on keyboards and receiving reports from conflict zones across Finnegan border systems. A select few were fully immersed in the network itself, rotating every few hours with fresh personnel to avoid burning out their minds as they had to manage data streams and process the information correctly. Even with the help of AI, it was a daunting task. His eyes moved across the large holographic map showcasing the extent of his forces and their current positions. That being said, his uncle had ensured that military communications from those loyal to him would face disconnections, lag, and constant attacks that hindered them on a large scale and reduced them to pockets of resistance instead of a unified force ready to strike against the would-be usurper, isolated, divided, disorganized, and wounded as his loyal forces were. They had not been broken. At the same time, however, such a tactic forced Draymore ships and soldiers to divide themselves into containing such pockets, whittling them down one wound at a time, or risk setting them loose and joining with other loyalist forces, creating a cascading effect that they would be hard-pressed to contain. It was a sound, if lengthy, strategy under normal circumstances, but the black ships at the Duke's disposal shifted the balance to his favor. His only solace was that the usurpers didn't have an endless supply of such vessels, and most of said ships, while powerful in surprise attacks and striking from the blackness of the void, were decidedly not dedicated ships of the line. So far, ever since Clara's departure, he'd overseen several skirmishes taking place and 2 assaults into Caiston systems to test their forces and response time. The after-action reports, those coming from scattered agents and spy probes, confirmed what he had feared. They were currently outmatched nearly 3-to-1 in the number of available warships. The traders had access to their shipyard inside their territories and kept producing ships at a slow but steady rate, replenishing their losses from the fleets and house vessels. He wasn't helpless, but he simply couldn't match his uncle's forces blow for blow. The fleets that had remained loyal to him suffered several casualties, be they destroyed utterly, captured, or disabled during the start of the coup. In turn, the fleets loyal to the Duke had sustained only a fraction of the damage they inflicted. His only true relief was that as long as they refrained from employing conscription, violating the rights of life that protected the commoners from blatant, cruel, uncaring tyranny, respected the trade lanes and the neutrality of houses, the conflict would remain as a succession dispute. Duke Cornelius is a wise, cautious man. I must be thankful for that. Many others wouldn't care about the good and future of the principality as long as their megalomaniacal thirst for power was satiated, preferring to rule over burned worlds and ruins before letting others bear the crown. Had he chosen the path of bloodshed, plunging us all into a civil war, the conflict would have been short-lived but brutal, surely paid in the blood of countless millions perishing just to slake the thirst of their betters, the prince thought grimly as he refrained himself from letting out a sigh. "Are you unwell, my prince?" Juliana Winfield asked in a soft but firm as titanium tone. "I am fine, Juliana," he replied with a certainty he did not possess. Not bothering to look at her as she stood next to his command chair, he continued, "I thought you were overseeing the training of our new Marines." Juliana crossed her arms, her elegant and pressed uniform refusing to leave a single wrinkle as she moved. With a huff of annoyance, she answered, "I'm trying to cram several years of proper training, etiquette, and knowledge into glory-seeking and blind fools with mere months to prepare. It is frustrating." "For you to complain so openly, I will not doubt your claims," the prince replied as a corner of his mouth curled into a tiny smirk. "Surely, I presume, not all is lost." "There are a select few that show both competence and talent. I will do my best to not break them completely before I finish polishing them into worthwhile Marines ready to serve you, my prince, and the principality," Juliana answered. "Good to hear," the prince said, his attention never shifting from the display. A couple of minutes passed by at a glacial pace until the prince, defeated, exhaled through his nose tiredly. "Is it that obvious?" "Very," Juliana confessed. "Clara will contact you, my prince, once she has news worth conveying. I'm certain of it. With the network in disarray and Lukacs doing all he can to expunge the ghost AIs and the assaulters from it, granting her a QEC was the most practical thing to do, my prince. You need not spend most of your time here, if I must be honest. You should rest, let the people see you, and form bonds with the representatives present." The prince scoffed. "What more can I do, Juliana? Treaties have been signed, promises made, poison swapped, and compromises reached. The people know I am here. The entirety of the principality knows I'm here alive. I will not cower. You know this. A warrior I am not, but I will not be found wanting in courage." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Not again." "My prince," said the blue-haired woman with a mix of awe and unflinching respect. "Then it will be as you desire. May I, however, inquire as to Amelia's status?" The prince wanted to chuckle at that response, but managed to suppress it. "She's been quiet. Not a single demand has been uttered, not one request proposed. She is all too happy to satiate the noble houses around and under her. Many lesser and minor nobles have answered the call, thanks to her, and thousands of commoners have volunteered themselves to assist in this great effort as part of the army or the navy." "We need those bodies," Juliana admitted. "Too many deserted, were captured, or killed. On that note, my prince, the personnel we picked from Woodshaft may lack discipline, but most have required minimal training. They have proven to be a boon in more ways than one." She paused for a moment as the prince ever so slightly turned his head toward her in curiosity. "Vivian can give you a detailed report if you wish to read it, my liege. But the important part about it is that they guide the recruits under them to perform their assigned duties to the best of their developing abilities, even if they are quite vulgar about it." "Vulgar?" the prince asked, intrigued. "They curse a lot, and their vocabulary is frankly to be admired." She smirked. "Quite imaginative, too. My drill sergeants were impressed." "You know exactly how to take my mind away from my worries, don't you?" he thought as he allowed himself a short-lived, soft chuckle, silently thanking his friend and companion at the same time. "Will you bestow upon me a demonstration?" "Perish the thought, my prince," Juliana answered back, losing her smirk. After a second-long pause, she carried on. "Alexander and Giovanni are still out there, my liege. The damnable traitors have not captured them, else we would know by now. That, or Duke Cornelius has decided to keep quiet in regards to them." The prince nodded. "I wish for all my siblings to be here, but I can't desire the impossible. Aside from Clara, I would like for Alexander to be here. He and I don't see eye to eye in most subjects, but we do not call upon ill on each other. If he were he could focus on the smaller picture and the problems at hand while I deal with the rest. Giovanni would be all too happy to take the spotlight and assist all those tiresome reunions and act as my voice." "Prince Giovanni does enjoy the attention and being fawned over," Juliana concurred. "To be frank, Juliana, I am forever thankful to a no-name commoner piloting a compost hauler of all things for delivering Clara to my side." The prince paused for a moment as the map shifted and focused on a segment with several golden and red dots blinking rapidly. "When our uncle delivered his speech, I feared she'd side with him. I could see it in her eyes." Juliana nodded. "You know Clara, Your Majesty," the prince snorted. "That I do. That's why she's my most beloved sister, a woman surrounded by a miasma of mystery that few can pierce. She, also, is not one to stand idle and is willing to take action into her own hands, even to her detriment." He paused for a moment. "If she had sided with Duke Cornelius, then his victory would be inevitable." Juliana looked at her prince, stupefied for a moment. "You cannot believe she's that pivotal despite everything she's capable of," she declared. "It was my mistake. I'll correct my words," the prince answered, watching as one golden dot vanished, but 5 red ones died in turn. Had Clara joined our uncle, a dangerous piece on the board would have been removed and moved to his side. They are geniuses in their respective fields and both know how to play the games of nobility and politics almost better than anyone else across the principality. Imagine having to face both of them at the same time in complete harmony with the advantage the Draymore loyalists possess right at this moment. I shudder at the mere proposition. "As we stand now, I believe you are correct, my prince," Juliana began. "Luckily for us, such a thing did not happen, and now she's fighting on your behalf, dealing with those cowardly Finnegans. Do you believe she will be victorious?" Before he answered, he watched 2 more golden dots vanish from the group of a dozen, now reduced to 9. But the 19 red dots had been reduced to 6, and they were blinking out one after the other. "I'm more concerned about what the Geenock will demand in return." She told me her plan. Plans within plans. It's both frightening and worthy of respect and recognition how she manages to create intricate webs out of assumptions and possibilities. More so how she molds those webs to changing factors. She is not one to set a goal and achieve how she wants. Rather, she allows events to guide her fingers as she knits a trap around her adversaries. He paused for a long moment until the last red dot was gone and the display returned to its original state. "I worry for her." "I understand you, my prince, and I share your worries," Juliana replied with a soft tone. "It seems Vashakati has defeated another group. Congratulations are in order?" she asked, unsure. "Later," the prince countered. "We must first open a corridor between us and Finnegan territory. The second princess will be victorious, and we must stand ready. Lukacs," he commanded, his eyes glowing for a second. A few moments later, a voice spoke in his mind. "Yes, my prince. How may I be of service?" Lukacs Ishtal replied. "Have the engineers and technicians made progress with the black ship?" the prince asked, projecting a serious, regal aura through the shared link. "Nothing since 3 days prior, my liege. The reactor they can understand, but this boogeyman armor and how it is made and operates is a mystery. Whenever they take a sample, the armor becomes brittle. Any invasive intrusion yields the same results. In theory, we know how it operates and what it does. In practice?" The man paused, ashamed. "My technicians are convinced there is a safeguard mechanism that's preventing reverse engineering from taking place. The traders surely have the same problems as us, but since we haven't encountered any black ship that appears to have been using Principality standards, it is safe to assume they too are stopped by these unknown countermeasures. Prioritize research on the black ship after the network is secured across Finnegan space," the prince ordered. "My liege." Then the link died. "I pity him greatly." "My prince?" Juliana asked. "Lukacs, House Ishtal sided with my uncle, yet he remained loyal. His case is not unique, but I pity him regardless," the prince answered. I shall incorporate him into my inner circle once this conflict is over if we survive it. He's a talented man, intelligent, loyal, and dutiful. Yes, I shall reward him handsomely." "Agreed, Your Majesty. Since you brought up pitiful things, my liege, have you considered that perhaps Lord Gabriel and Lady Veronica stand against their treacherous father?" "Veronica would never even think about betraying her father. A sempitern would grace the principality with their presence before Veronica even conjured the shadowed whisper of the idea of betrayal against her father." "But Gabriel?" He paused for a moment. "My cousin is not as single-minded as Veronica, and certainly he's not nearly as zealous as she is. If he stands against his father, then I hope he is not treated unkindly." Another long silence passed between them, broken only by the background noise of steady work. Suddenly, the holographic display began to glitch out and every screen went dark. Juliana unsheathed her sword, activating it as 10 Royal Marines suddenly materialized around the prince, their distortion fields disengaging. The prince stood, looking around at the chaos. Some people screamed in pain, others fell to the ground in a fit of painful seizures, the consequence of being abruptly disconnected from the network. The phenomenon lasted for several seconds until everything seemed to return to normal. Before anyone could gather the courage to verify any station, the holographic map died out and then projected a bound, bloody, and broken Frederick Anderson. Before the man stood the prince, Clara, and Redford. Every screen came back to life displaying the same scenario, taken from the perspective of a security camera. "Shut the transmission down!" Juliana cried out, awakening many from their stunned stupor. Rushing to their consoles, personnel tried to access their consoles, but no command obeyed them. "We can't! We're locked out of the system! It's widespread across the whole network!" one shouted. "Locate the source immediately!" countered the Winfield. "It's no use!" another shouted, using a portable locator. "The signal is coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's within the network itself. Who is responsible for something like this?" Juliana asked angrily, unable to do anything about it. Looking at her left, she watched 2 Royal Marines connecting to a terminal. Hoping against hope, she waited with bated breath until one of the Royal Marines turned to her and shook their head. For his part, the prince only stared at the projection with a glacial stare of indifference, waiting for what was about to happen next. His wait only lasted half a minute as the still images began to move and voices were heard. "Please, my prince, I have not betrayed you," Frederick Anderson pleaded. "You invited discourse within my fleet, evidence found in your possession, and plans to assassinate me were uncovered. Yet you claim innocence?" the prince asked in a cold, emotionless voice. "Fabrication! Lies!" Frederick countered. "House Anderson will pledge itself to your cause, my prince. I am loyal. I am a potential heir of my house. You cannot do this to me. The evidence is inconclusive at best." "Silence!" Clara roared, moving forth to strike the helpless man across his face, causing him to spit blood and his lower lip to be ripped slightly. "Confess to your crimes, or House Anderson shall know my wrath, you vile, treacherous snake." Her eyes narrowed as a sadistic smirk spread across her lips. "Or do you deny House Astor's rightful rule and sentence? I say that the evidence points you as a traitor, and so it is true. Confess." "I'm a loyal son of the principality," Frederick pleaded, gritting his teeth. "I have been nothing but loyal." "I tire of this drivel," the prince said, turning his back to Frederick. "Redford, end him. Know that you shall die as the scum you are, and that your house shall pay the price in due time, Frederick. We shall find your conspirators and end them too." "My prince, no, I am loyal. My house is loyal. You can't do this to me. To us," Frederick pleaded as Redford silently unholstered an odd-looking rifle from his back. It was mostly rectangular, bulky, and was aesthetically ugly. The old man squeezed the trigger, and a reeving echo was heard at the same time the barrel of the rifle changed from a grotesque, opaque, silvery color to bright orange. "My prince!" "I'm the prince. I can do as I please. Nobles lead, commoners follow. To royalty such as I, even nobility is nothing more than commoner stock," the prince said as Frederick twitched in pain, foam forming at the mouth as blood vessels popped inside his eyes and scarlet blood trickled down his cheeks and out his ears. Within moments, Frederick Anderson was dead, his gray matter liquefied inside his skull by a high-yield microwave rifle. Shall we toss his body out, brother dearest? Clara asked, while staring at the corpse of the noble, smiling with sick amusement. Store it! We will need it for when we meet the rest of his treacherous house, the prince ordered, then hummed. Noble houses fall, others rise. Who shall rise in their stead? I can't. The transmission suddenly glitched out, and everything went black for several seconds. Then power returned, and everything returned to normal. My prince! The voice of Lukacs Ishtal cut through the speakers across the command room. I've managed to purge the system and eliminate the intruder. Only a third of the runtime passed. I shall find who is responsible for spreading this monstrous fabrication against your honor, my prince. The prince sat down on his chair, eyes fixated on the returned map. He said nothing even as his heart pounded with indignation and anger. It was obviously a fake, a construct meant to sow chaos, mistrust, doubt, and fear. Lukacs had managed to cut it short, but the damage had been done. He didn't bother to issue a containment order. Whoever had done it had prepared extensively for this singular attack, and now it was spreading across the wide and birth of the principality, outside of his control. In his mind, an imaginary chessboard manifested itself with a few pieces already moved. He moved a white bishop and ate one of his black pawns, eliminating it from the board. Clara, he whispered, may your ventures find success soon. In a distant location, unbeknownst to the prince, Jade stood up from his seat after using a short-range electromagnetic pulse to fry his equipment before exiting his hiding hole for the last time. He tossed a black grenade inside the room as he closed the door. As he walked away from the abandoned building, a blinding white flash shone behind him. For the principality, he muttered solemnly. Gallant Venture War Room. Maximilian Usurek cupped a glass with grace as he brought it up to his lips, the white liquid touching his lips for a second before he greedily drank from it for a few seconds until the glass was emptied. As he set the glass down on the table, a servant approached carrying a large ornate jug before pouring more of that same white liquid into his glass. When it was done, the servant moved back to avoid causing his master any inconvenience. The lone wolf quietly and quickly scanned the room, ignoring the servants present to focus on those that mattered. Across the table sat Javier Wunder, his eyes fixated on a datapad while an untouched cup of fine wine sat before him. Casimir Kasten sat to his left. The young was unable to hide the smile that spread across his lips, more than likely due to the results the open negotiations had yielded. To his right sat Felicity Cintor, who was, understandably so, elated beyond measure given the radiant and smug aura surrounding her. He drank from his glass again, suppressing a chuckle in the process. As he put his glass down, they all received the signal they'd been waiting for. The Samuel's Glory is leaving dock, Casimir said. Right on the expected time. It seems that Genak was unable to conjure the support he needed. I wouldn't be so sure just yet, Javier countered. Let us wait and see their heading before we take action. Silently, everyone agreed as the center of the table split open to reveal several projectors that quickly displayed a holographic representation of the system. Quickly zooming to Balakura and its immediate area of influence, the stations and themselves, represented by a group of 6 green dots, were immediately identified. Similarly, the captured Samuel's Glory also appeared, represented by a single purple dot. Javier pressed a single finger on his datapad, and the large screen in the room came to life, showing the nearly pitch-black hull of the Samuel's Glory slowly rotating as it moved away from the station. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, the ship's engines came to life, showcasing a faint light, pushing it forth to its new destination. They know we're watching, he commented, frowning, and yet their heading, computer, calculate its possible exit vectors out of the system in accordance to its current heading. Calculating, the AI replied, and 2 seconds later the holographic map was painted with over 3 dozen red lines that led to possible exit vectors and jump points. Javier put his datapad down and hummed deeply. They're not heading back to Finnegan territory. None of those jump points would lead them back to their space. Could it be a distraction? Maybe a trap or a trick of misdirection? Casimir proposed. The Reaper doesn't strike me like the sort to rely on such things without good reason. If I were her, I would crawl back the way I came and then shift direction after 2 or 3 jumps, Maximilian answered. eyes narrowing and a cocky smirk spread across his lips. Shame we can't deploy spy drones or send a probe after them. Well, we can, but not in neutral space. That doesn't mean we can't go where we please or keep an eye on them, Casimir countered. And the same applies to them. Where do you think they're heading, Javier? It is too early to draw any real conclusions, but if their trajectory aligns to any of these 4 routes, he said, and all but 4 red lines vanished, all of them heading up on the tri-dimensional map, then it is highly probable that their destination will be the Hastrung system. The prince does not have the strength to spare in aiding a house of cowards, Felicity countered, her smile never faltering. We have not received a warning, so Jinak has not bent the knee. The Reaper may be a poisonous viper pretending to be a songbird, but even she can't force the head of a house to submit to her desires out of hand. If that's the case, then why isn't she returning to her brother? Casimir asked, unsure. If they're heading to the Hastrung system, they will be outmatched by the Drazen infesting it. Javier cut the young man off with a dismissive gesture. At least 3 entire raiding fleets entered the system. Granted, we don't know how big those fleets are, but a single ship can't hope to face such strength in battle and survive it. I doubt that even a battleship could achieve such a feat, let alone an assault destroyer. The moment they enter the system, the warp signature of their arrival will alert the Xenos that enemies have come. A moot point. The Samuel's glory can simply hide after their arrival, Casimir protested. Ah, Maximilian chuckled. But the plants will know an enemy is present and they'll be on alert. Say what you will about the Drazen, but they're not stupid. Stupid species don't build spaceships, he declared with humor before drinking some more of his beverage. Then is it a trick? An attempt to fool us? Casimir asked, crossing his arms. Maximilian shrugged and hummed deeply. Let us imagine for a moment that the princess is truly heading to Hastrung. What is she hoping to achieve? A direct battle is unlikely. For all her reputation, I doubt she's a good commander. Despite her ego, I honestly cannot see her sitting in the captain's chair, which must mean that a competent high-ranking officer is acting as her XO. A commodore is unlikely. A rear or vice admiral, perhaps. A commander, quite possible. But who? He drank the rest of his beverage, and again the servant approached to refill his glass. The answer is obvious. Redford Kalin or Juliana Winfield are the only 2 real candidates worth consideration. I see your point. The prince wouldn't allow anyone but someone he places a considerable amount of trust in such a position. With his limited roster of capable Royal Navy officers, there really isn't another choice but one of them, Javier mused, taking his datapad. After poking at it for a few seconds, the screen split in half, with the left still showing the Samuel's glory, while the right showcased a still image of a man that caused Felicity to tilt her head in amusement. With the subject of trust and all that it carries, I am far more worried about this man, this Wyatt Staples. How so? Isn't he just an elevated commoner? Asked Casimir, eyebrow raised. I was led to believe that was the case, but look closely. Notice anything different? Javier questioned. Felicity was the first to reply. That image. This is from that joke of a royal procession, is it not? Javier nodded. His eyes are brown there, but the ones that we saw were heterochromatic. Surely he received eye gene enhancement. Her answer was simple and matter-of-factly, but just as she was about to dismiss the issue entirely, the remark made by Maximilian assaulted her mind once more. What does it take for an unknown man to gain the favor of royalty? An unknown man, she carried on, her voice losing the edge of smugness and humor it had carried ever since the negotiations ended. Javier, are you implying that the prince himself trusts this commoner? I wouldn't go to such extremes, Felicity, but there is a measure of it put on that man. The Reaper is a paranoic that doesn't allow anyone to approach at a distance closer than an arm's length. And yet this man stands next to her much like that accursed blue-haired demon does. Javier paused for a moment, tapping his chin with his left middle finger for several seconds. You said he showed no interest in you despite your attempts at erotism. Could it be that this Wyatt Staples is merely a pleasure toy the whore fancies? Felicity snorted at the idea. Not once did he show interest in my figure, Javier, but he was flustered at my closeness. So it is safe to say that he does not find men attractive. He is by no means unappealing, but I wouldn't define him as particularly handsome either. The aura of defiance and focus around him is intriguing, and I could see any lesser noble lady entertaining the idea of bedding such a man. Then again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Reaper fancies such bestial men. You two are idiots, Maximilian added with a wide grin spread across his lips. Or perhaps are you merely blind? Ah, I was wondering when your insulting tongue would be unleashed, Maximilian, Felicity countered. Javier sighed while Casimir listened carefully. And this is why I hate soldiers, imbeciles with no tact, no brains, and no sense of respect. I should consider reporting your actions as suspect for treason, Usurek, to entertain the request of that sordid wench. What were you thinking? Oh, apologies. You need a functioning brain to achieve such a feat. Maximilian drank from his glass before replying. Be careful, Wunder. I can tolerate many things, but blatant insults do dry my well of mercy rather quickly. Unless you wish to return to your house missing a limb or inside a casket, I suggest you shut your mouth and apply that same respect you demand onto your betters. Javier sneered at the lone wolf but kept his mouth tightly shut for the time being. We are allies, like it or not, Javier. We serve his Lord Regent together, not divided. Cease your petty squabbles. Javier said nothing at Felicity's retort whilst Maximilian merely smirked. Now, Maximilian, explain yourself and do not speak in pointless riddles. For an observant woman, Felicity, you seem to not notice what is right in front of you. That man Wyatt Staples? He's a dangerous one, and you didn't see it, he explained, and drank from his glass again. I believe his shameful debacle, whilst impressive, was already proof enough of that, Javier retorted. Have you ever killed someone? Maximilian asked, his voice losing all sense of easy-going and humorous tone. Everyone, including the servants and the maids, shuddered in response. I have. Plenty of times. With my own hands and whilst looking into the eyes of my enemies, too. It takes guts and cold blood to kill someone. Even killing a no-name commoner or a worthless pirate is harder than you may believe. There's a huge difference between killing someone as you stare at them and simply ordering the demise of your enemies. And that man? Maximilian asked, letting out a bellowing, deep, dark chuckle. He'd kill us without remorse or a second thought if we were in his sights, unleashed by the woman that fitted a collar around his neck, and after seeing him in person, I don't believe there's not a collar at all. That's not that impressive, Casimir said, regaining his composure. You would kill anyone that House Centaur tells you to kill. True, Maximilian admitted. However, little Caiston, I'm a lone wolf. I'm a trained killer, among other things. What the fuck does that even make him if it takes 4 Royal Marines to restrain him? He either got eye gene enhancement or his brown eyes were always a facade. His precision was to be lauded, and his loyalty to the princess is unquestionable. Who is this man? Where did he come from? He asked, shaking his head slowly. When I stared into his eyes, I saw a void. No anger, no fear, no doubt, just a pit of darkness that stared back at me. Then we should eliminate him, Felicity proposed, and eliminate the Reaper if she is heading to the Hastrung system. Are you insane? Casimir protested. If we attack the Samuel's Glory whilst in Ferentis territory, all of our efforts will sink to ruin, not to mention that when the prince learns of his sister's demise, our houses will suffer the consequences. Angry men make mistakes, Felicity countered. We want him angry. If the whore dies by our hands, the Lord Regent will reward us handsomely for removing such a pesky fly from his sight. That arrogant prince will try to avenge his sister, waste his precious ships, lose supporters, and likely break with tradition and laws. Our Lord Regent needs not to kill the prince to achieve his victory. A tarnished reputation will suffice once he is shown to be the incompetent beast he truly is. It's not an impossible idea, Maximilian added. If battle is to be had in a fallen system, then no dishonor shall befall upon us since Hastrung does not belong to House Ferentis, he said, and the holographic display zoomed out to reveal the star systems controlled by House Ferentis. One black blotch could be seen, marked simply as abandoned, the Hastrung system. Let us entertain such a thought, Javier continued as Casimir leaned back on his seat and Maximilian was served another glass of his white beverage. We can't simply follow them. Not now. We need space to play in our favor to remain concealed. How do you propose we'll avoid detection during jumps? We'll follow other ships or bribe jump-capable ships and act as escorts, Felicity answered. Convoys are common enough to not raise suspicion if the number is 10 or more. They will be expecting 6 simultaneous jump signatures. 10? A dozen? Not so much. Less so amidst several other ships entering the systems constantly. We'll be several hours behind them, but that won't be a problem. We know where they are headed if indeed the wench is planning on liberating the system herself. If she changes course, then we can safely return to our original mission. Otherwise, the pressing issue is our firepower. Our Corvus frigates and the gallant Venture won't stand a chance against the Samuel's Glory, said the tall, thin man. Not in a direct battle. If the princess wishes to charge against the Drazen and whatever rebel and pirate scum is left in that accursed system, then I say we let them fight. We can send several probes as we wait on a nearby system to spy on the battle. If they achieve victory, then they won't achieve it unscathed. The Samuel Glory will be running hot. Even with several hours at their disposal, they won't be able to hide or make repairs fast enough. If they get killed by the Drazen, then that saves us the work. If they try to escape, we'll deliver the finishing blow, Maximilian chuckled. Our best-case scenario is if they achieve total victory or if they leave the invaders crippled whilst they are severely wounded themselves. We can enter the system, destroy the remnants, and claim 2 victories, the death of the Reaper and the favor of House Ferentis. Wait. Instead of destroying the ship, perhaps we can recapture it. Take prisoners? I need to know what happened to Samuel. His parents, my uncle and aunt, and the rest of my cousins deserve to know what became of him, Casimir proposed. I'd rather not take such chances in person, Maximilian replied. I can perhaps stand up against a Royal Marine if I'm careful, but the Bloodrend, I will not put my life at risk for your sake, little Caiston. Casimir opened his mouth, but clearly thought better than to argue against the lone wolf. Closing his mouth, he gave a solemn nod. Suddenly, Felicity stood up, and her maid stood at attention. Lady Felicity, our course of action has been decided. We shall not waste this opportunity. If their goal is not the liberation of that fallen system, then we lose nothing, for we have already won, answered the black-haired woman. As potentially dangerous as Wyatt Staples may be, his idiocy, incompetence, and frank honesty have cost the Reaper dearly. I have defeated her. Without Ferentis supply lines, their mobility shall be hampered, and we gain another angle of attack to strike against the prince and those loyal to him. We failed in gaining the support of House Ferentis, Casimir pointed out. What real choice does Geenock and his line of cowards have? They will barter their most precious and abundant resources to us. Other neutral houses may buy their resources yet, but the exorbitant price they will demand from House Astor will be a net benefit for us. Every road before shall guide us to our victory. The Reaper has lost. I won. I defeated her. She's not infallible, she said, and began to make her way out of the room with long, slow steps, drinking in her own victory. Now I will retire. I must rest. Javier, inform Captain Ciro of our decision and prepare for our departure. As you command, Javier replied as he returned his attention to his datapad. Soon, Felicity was gone, and the 3 men still sitting at the table shared a long moment of silence, broken only when Maximilian drank from his glass. It is indeed our victory. Pardon? Casimir asked curiously. It is as Felicity said. We cornered that wretched animal into a corner and left her with no room to maneuver. Our victory was deserved and planned, yet hard fought. We were ready to counter her regardless, but the blunder from her simpleton gave us some precious information we required, he grumbled, tapping on his datapad. Not content with that, the Reaper insulted Felicity, openly. It was her mistake to place any amount of trust in a lowly, inbred commoner. If he survives whatever torturous punishment his idiocy cost the princess, I care not for it. Her barely contained fury was most certainly a death sentence anyway, he finished with a deep, pensive hum instead of gloating some more. His eyes narrowed, ignoring the expecting Casimir. The Caiston sighed a few seconds later upon realizing Javier had shifted his focus somewhere else. His eyes turned to Maximilian, who was impossibly being served yet another glass of his strange white beverage. What are you drinking? You've been drinking it ever since we came back. How are you not drunk or mildly inebriated yet? He paused for a moment, as if recalling several short memories at once. Come to think of it, I've never seen you drink anything other than that, water or tea." Maximilian smiled a bemused smile before making a quick gesture with his free hand. Instantly, another of his servants approached Casimir, put down a fresh glass before him, and filled it with the white substance. The lone wolf watched in silence, wondering what the young Caiston would do. Casimir stared at the offered glass, then at Maximilian, then at the glass again. Pushing his suspicion aside, he grabbed the pleasantly cold glass, brought it up to his mouth, sniffed it, and then took a sip from it. Rather impolitely, he smacked his lips and ran his tongue across them, surprised. He took a second, longer sip and audibly gulped the beverage down his throat. "It's sweet," said the young man in disbelief. "You will find not a single drop of alcohol in this drink," Maximilian answered. "This is nothing more than a refreshing drink produced in my homeworld. Nobles and commoners alike drink it, although this quality is reserved for the nobility, of course," he said with a little chortle. "It's delicious," Casimir admitted, drinking half his glass before continuing. "But why not drink wine instead?" "Because I can't," Maximilian answered without shame. "Or rather, I can easily drink wine or other alcoholic beverages, Morshel, spirits, Nulasando, Mucinex, Pasquia. My family owns vast vineyards and entire industries dedicated to producing all sorts of non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverages. Truth be told, I was to take on my uncle's mantle and become a sommelier," he confessed as he let out a distant, mournless sigh. "I joined the Royal Navy as soon as I could, rose through the ranks, and earned my way to the position I am now at. Not that I do not appreciate you sharing your personal story, but what does this have to do with you being unable to drink wine?" Casimir asked before taking a large gulp from the refreshing drink. "It has everything to do with it, Casimir. When I was selected as a lone wolf candidate and later became one through effort and a rather substantial kill count of our dreaded enemies, I swore upon my honor as a sacrifice on my behalf to drink alcohol no more and forgo the stimulus of recreational substances," Maximilian revealed, drinking some more of his beverage. "You must renounce such things to become a lone wolf?" Casimir asked, wounded, silently glancing at the untouched cup of wine, forgotten before the pensive Javier. "Every lone wolf must sacrifice something dear to them as a pledge of honor. Some sacrifice riches, others sacrifice the pleasures of the flesh. A sacrifice has to be something with meaning or something you hold dear. Nothing but my oath prevents me from indulging in such activities again, for they were truly dear to me. Many lone wolves break their vows and oaths of sacrifice. I've been tempted, but I wouldn't be Maximilian the Roaring Thunder Usurek otherwise, now would I? To besmirch my honor for so little gain is inconceivable, little Caiston." "Bersmich, your honor." "I believe I understand," Casimir said, staring at his glass. "Is that why you entertained the princess during the negotiations, gave her your autograph? Should I've refused such an earnest request? I may not hold the Reaper in high esteem, harbor any respect whatsoever for her, or consider her to be anything more than a dangerous tool with no master to control her. But I also hold no ill will toward her. What harm does it carry to give her something so trivial? It costs me nothing, and if the prince is to win this conflict, I may call upon her for salvation depending on the mood of that brother of hers." Casimir scoffed. "You can't possibly believe that the Lord Regent will be defeated by his nephew." Maximilian shrugged. "My contract binds me to House Centaur. Honor, fealty, and duty tie me to their orders. However, I am no fool. Blind loyalty leads to zealotry. Hear my advice, Casimir. Never believe yourself to be invincible, infallible, or incorruptible. The moment you do, your fall shall be monumental. To win a battle, first see yourself losing it. It will humble you, keep you focused." "I see." "Thank you, Maximilian," Casimir said, processing what the lone wolf had shared with him. Drinking the rest of his beverage, he turned to Javier. "Javier, what do you believe?" "I believe in results," Javier answered, his expression serious as his eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell me, Maximilian, are you at all familiar with the concept of a hollow victory?" "A Pyrrhic victory?" "Yes, had to go through it more than once," the tall, handsome man replied, his expression darkening for a split second. "No, not a Pyrrhic victory. A Pyrrhic victory is still a victory, perhaps not worth it, but a victory nonetheless," Javier countered. "A hollow victory is when you achieve a victory, regardless of how hard the battle was to achieve it, but it leaves you unfulfilled. A victory that does not appear to be won despite you've clearly won and achieved what you wished to achieve. He paused for a moment. Simply put, a victory that is hollow. Can't say I know what that feels like, Maximilian replied, raising an eyebrow. Why do you ask? Because that is how I'm feeling right now. We won, didn't we? We defeated the Reaper, deprived her of what she wanted, all but forced her into an act of desperation and near-suicidal intent to liberate a system from the tentacles of those horrid Xenos. Felicity is right. This is our victory. His eyes turned to the map, following the purple dot as it slowly moved along the lines of one of the possible highlighted trajectories. So why do I feel hollow? No answer was found that day.